August 16, 1977. Graceland.
2:47 a.m.
Elvis Presley stood barefoot in his mansion's kitchen, told his security chief something that made the man's coffee cup freeze midair, and within 6 hours, the king of rock and roll would be dead. But what he said that night, what made Priscilla cover her mouth when she heard it days later, wasn't about death at all. It was about a promise he'd kept secret for 20 years. The kitchen lights hummed soft yellow against white tile. Elvis wore his usual midnight uniform. Black silk pajama pants, gold chains catching the light, his face puffy from medication but his eyes sharp with something like clarity. Charlie Hodge, his right-hand man for 15 years, stood by the refrigerator holding a sandwich he'd made for the boss. Neither man had slept. Elvis had been playing gospel music on the piano until 2 in the morning, his fingers finding chords he hadn't touched in months. "Charlie," Elvis said, his voice quiet but firm, "I need you to understand something." Charlie set the sandwich down. In all their years together, the tours, the films, the Vegas residencies, he'd learned to read Elvis's tone. This wasn't a request. This was confession. Elvis pulled a folded envelope from his pajama pocket. The paper was old, edges soft from handling. "There's a girl in Memphis. Her name is Sarah Daniels. She's 19 now. Lives with her grandmother on Cooper Street." Charlie waited. The kitchen clock ticked. "I've been paying for everything since she was born," Elvis continued. "Her school, her grandmother's house, her medical bills, everything. Nobody knows except my accountant and one lawyer. Not even the colonel." The silence stretched. Outside, the August cicadas screamed their summer song. "She thinks it's from some charity," Elvis said. "But I want you to make sure, if anything happens to me, you make sure she knows it was me. You make sure she gets the letter I wrote her." Charlie's throat tightened. "Boss, what are you?" "Just promise me," Elvis interrupted. "Promise me she'll know." Charlie promised. 6 hours later, Elvis would collapse in his bathroom. But this moment, this kitchen confession, would become the story that nobody at Graceland could forget. The story that, when Priscilla finally heard it 3 days after the funeral, made her cry for reasons she couldn't fully explain. But why this girl? Why this secret? And what was in that letter? Sarah Daniels didn't know she was connected to Elvis Presley. How could she? She was just a kid growing up in a small brick house in North Memphis, raised by her grandmother Ruth, who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry to make ends meet. Except the ends always seemed to meet, strangely, perfectly. When Sarah was 7, her grandmother got a call. An anonymous benefactor wanted to pay for Sarah's private school tuition. When Sarah was 12 and needed surgery for a heart condition, the bills vanished before Ruth could even panic. When Ruth's mortgage came due and the bank threatened foreclosure, a lawyer appeared with a cashier's check. "It's a charity," the lawyer always said. "They prefer to remain anonymous." Ruth was suspicious but desperate. She accepted. She prayed. She worked her shifts and raised her granddaughter in a house that should have crushed them but somehow never did. Sarah grew up knowing she was lucky. She didn't know why. What she also didn't know, her mother had worked at Graceland for 3 months in 1957, a shy 19-year-old hired to help with fan mail during the chaos of Elvis's first explosion into superstardom. Her name was Marie Daniels. She had dark hair and nervous hands and a smile that lit up when she felt safe. Elvis was 22 then, already too famous, already surrounded by chaos. But Marie was quiet. She didn't scream. She organized his mail into neat stacks and sometimes, late at night when the office was empty, she'd stay late to finish sorting while Elvis played guitar in the music room down the hall. They talked, just talked, about normal things, about Memphis, about family, about the weight of being seen by everyone and known by no one. One night in October, talking turned to something else. Marie left Graceland in January 1958, 2 weeks before Elvis shipped out for Germany. She was pregnant. She never told him. She couldn't. The lawyers, the contracts, the machine around Elvis, it was too big, too terrifying. She went home to her mother's house, had the baby in August 1958, and tried to build a life. But Elvis found out anyway. How? A private investigator hired on a hunch. A follow-up call. a confirmation. By September 1958, Elvis was in Germany, and his accountant in Memphis had quiet instructions. Take care of them. Everything. Always. Silence required. For 19 years, the payments came like clockwork. Sarah's school, Ruth's house, the medical bills, the groceries when money got tight. All of it filtered through lawyers and shell accounts and anonymous charity paperwork. Marie died when Sarah was 6, a car accident on a rainy Tuesday. Elvis sent flowers to the funeral anonymously. He never met Sarah, never called, never broke the wall he'd built between his public life and this private promise. But he kept the promise. Why? Because Marie never asked for anything. Because Sarah was innocent. Because Elvis knew what it meant to grow up without a father. And he couldn't let this child grow up without at least the shadow of protection. And now, in August 1977, with his body failing and his mind cycling through decades of decisions, Elvis wanted Sarah to know the truth. But was he ready for what that truth might cost? Elvis wrote the letter in March 1977, 5 months before his death. He was sitting in his bedroom at Graceland, 3 a.m., the TV flickering mute in the corner showing some late-night Western. His hands shook slightly, side effects from the medication cocktail his doctors had him on. But his handwriting stayed neat, careful, deliberate. Dear Sarah, you don't know me, but I've known about you since the day you were born. He wrote 3 pages. He told her about her mother, about the quiet nights in the Graceland office, about how Marie had been kind when kindness was rare in his world. He told her he'd tried to do right by her even if he'd done it from a distance. He apologized for the silence. He told her she had his eyes. He sealed the letter, put it in his safe, added instructions for his lawyer. Deliver it only if something happens to me, or if she needs to know sooner. But Elvis's mind was elsewhere too. His marriage to Priscilla had ended in 1973, and though they remained close, still loved each other in that complicated way, the divorce had split something in him. Priscilla got Lisa Marie most of the time. Elvis got Graceland, his career, his pills, his isolation. He'd told Priscilla bits and pieces about Marie over the years. Pillow talk during their marriage, late-night confessions during the good times. Priscilla knew about the girl in Memphis, the anonymous support, the hidden daughter. She'd never been angry about it. If anything, she'd been sad. Sad that Elvis carried so much alone. Sad that he couldn't be a father to this child the way he wanted to be to Lisa Marie. You're a good man doing a hard thing, Priscilla had told him once in 1974, after too much wine and too much honesty. But that girl deserves to know you. Elvis had nodded, but he didn't act. Fear kept him frozen. Fear of lawyers. Fear of tabloids. Fear that Sarah would hate him for the distance. Fear that knowing would shatter the fragile peace he'd built around his secret. So the letter stayed in the safe. And Elvis kept playing his gospel music, kept taking his pills, kept touring even though his body begged him to stop. But by August 1977, something shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the dreams he'd been having. Dreams where he saw Marie standing in a doorway, waiting, patient, asking him without words, "When will you tell her?" Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe he just knew his time was running out. That's why he told Charlie in the kitchen. That's why he made him promise. That's why, on August 16th at 2:47 a.m., Elvis Presley stood barefoot on tile and said the quiet part out loud. But Charlie wasn't the only one who heard a confession that night. August 16th, 1977, 2:30 p.m. Ginger Alden found Elvis unresponsive on his bathroom floor. The emergency call went out at 2:33 p.m. By 3:30 p.m., Baptist Memorial Hospital pronounced him dead. By 4 p.m., the world knew. But at Graceland, in the hours before the media storm, the staff moved through shock like sleepwalkers. Charlie Hodge sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Elvis had confessed hours earlier, staring at nothing. The envelope was still in his pocket, the promise still ringing in his ears. Mary Jenkins, Elvis's cook for 14 years, made coffee nobody drank. "He was just here," she kept saying. "He was just playing piano." Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager and closest friend, fielded calls from lawyers and family while his hands trembled. Outside, fans were already gathering at the gates, crying, holding candles even though it was still daylight. And in the midst of it all, someone had to call Priscilla. She arrived that evening from Los Angeles with Lisa Marie. The house was full of people but felt empty. Priscilla moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching furniture, looking at photos, holding herself together for her daughter. Charlie found her alone in the music room near midnight. She was sitting at Elvis's piano, her fingers resting on keys she didn't press. "He told me something this morning," Charlie said quietly. Before he made me promise something." Priscilla looked up. Her eyes were red but dry. She'd cried herself out hours ago. Charlie pulled out the envelope. "There's a girl, Sarah Daniels. He wanted me to make sure she got this." Priscilla stared at the envelope. She knew immediately. All those late-night conversations, all those confessions. It clicked into place. "The girl from Cooper Street," she whispered. "You knew. He told me years ago." He felt guilty about it. About the distance. About everything. Charlie held out the envelope. "He wanted her to know. Said if anything happened, give it to her." Priscilla interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. "Give it to her and make sure she understands. Make sure she knows he tried." "Should I tell anyone else? The lawyers? The family?" Priscilla shook her head. "This is his choice. His last choice. We honor it." 3 days later, after the funeral, after the procession of 80,000 mourners filed past the casket, after the world had said goodbye to Elvis Presley, Charlie Hodge drove to Cooper Street. He found the small brick house. He knocked on the door. Ruth Daniels answered, suspicion immediate in her eyes. "Ma'am," Charlie said. "My name is Charlie Hodge. I worked for Elvis Presley. I need to speak with your granddaughter." Ruth's face went pale. "It's not bad news," Charlie added quickly. It's a gift. Something he wanted her to have." Sarah came to the door. 19 years old, dark hair, nervous hands, her mother's smile. And yes, she had his eyes. Charlie gave her the envelope. "He asked me to tell you," Charlie said, his voice breaking slightly, "that he's sorry he couldn't do more, but he wanted you to know." Sarah opened the letter right there on the porch while Ruth held her shoulder. She read it once, then again, then a third time while tears ran down her face and she couldn't speak. Finally, she looked up at Charlie. "This is real. Every word," Charlie said. "He was my father?" "He couldn't say it publicly, but yes, and he made sure you were taken care of. Always." Sarah folded the letter carefully, held it against her chest, and wept. Ruth wept too, holding her granddaughter, finally understanding 19 years of anonymous miracles. And Charlie drove back to Graceland knowing he'd kept his promise. But the story didn't end there. 3 weeks after Elvis's death, Priscilla returned to Graceland alone. She walked through the rooms where they'd fought and loved and raised Lisa Marie. She touched the piano where he'd played gospel hymns the night he died. She stood in the kitchen where he'd made his final confession to Charlie. And she thought about Sarah Daniels. Priscilla had never met her. Never would, probably. But she felt connected to this girl in a strange, unnameable way. They both loved Elvis. They both lived in his shadow. They both carried pieces of him that the world would never fully see. "You did a good thing," Priscilla whispered to the empty house. "You did a good thing and you were afraid to own it. That was always your problem. You loved too much and trusted too little." She found Lisa Marie playing in the backyard. 9 years old, already shaped by loss. "Mommy," Lisa Marie said, "do you think Daddy's watching us?" Priscilla knelt down, pulled her daughter close. "I think he's always been watching the people he loved, even the ones he couldn't say out loud." Lisa Marie nodded, not quite understanding but feeling the truth of it. Years later, when Lisa Marie was older, Priscilla would tell her about Sarah, about the quiet promise, about the letter. Lisa Marie would ask to meet her half-sister. Priscilla would arrange it. The meeting would be awkward, beautiful, sad, healing. But that comes later. For now, in September 1977, Priscilla sat in Graceland's kitchen and thought about all the things Elvis never said out loud. All the love he carried in silence. All the promises he kept without credit. He was complicated, she told Mary Jenkins, who brought her tea she didn't ask for. He was good, Mary said firmly. Don't let anyone tell you different. Priscilla nodded. She knew. She'd always known. The world saw Elvis as a legend, an icon, a tragedy. But the people who loved him, really loved him, saw something else. They saw a man who carried too much, who tried to protect everyone, who made promises in the dark and kept them even when no one was watching. That's who Elvis really was. Not the jumpsuit, not the Vegas show, not the pills or the mansion or the fame. The man who paid a stranger's mortgage for 19 years. The man who wrote a letter he was too afraid to send. The man who stood barefoot in his kitchen at 2:47 a.m. and made sure someone knew the truth. That's the Elvis who haunts Graceland. That's the Elvis who matters. Sarah Daniels kept the letter in a wooden box her grandmother gave her. She read it every few months, usually late at night when the house was quiet and she could cry without explaining why. The letter changed her. Not because it gave her a famous father, though that fact would follow her the rest of her life, but because it gave her context. It explained the anonymous help. It explained her grandmother's confusion. It explained the strange feeling she'd always had that someone was watching over her from a distance. She didn't tell many people at first. The lawyers advised against it. The Elvis estate was already complicated, already messy with lawsuits and inheritance battles. Priscilla's lawyers reached out quietly, offering a small settlement. Not because they had to, but because Priscilla insisted. It's what he would have wanted, Priscilla told them. Sarah took the settlement. She used it to finish college. She became a teacher working with kids in North Memphis, the same neighborhood where her grandmother raised her. She married at 26, had 2 kids of her own, built a quiet life. But she never forgot. Every August 16th, she visited Elvis's grave at Graceland. She'd stand among the thousands of fans, anonymous in the crowd, and she'd whisper thank you to a father she never met, but who loved her the only way he knew how. In 1995, when Graceland opened more of the mansion to tours, Sarah went through like any other visitor. She stood in the kitchen where Elvis made his midnight confession. She touched the piano where he played gospel music. She walked through the meditation garden where he was buried. The tour guide, a woman named Betty who'd worked at Graceland since 1972, noticed Sarah crying. "You okay, honey?" Betty asked. Sarah wiped her eyes, smiled. "I'm fine. Just, it means more than people realize. What he did. Who he was." Betty nodded. "He was more than people knew. That's for sure." Sarah almost told her. Almost said the quiet part out loud. But she stopped. Some truths were too big for tour groups. Some truths belonged in wooden boxes, in folded letters, in whispered thank yous at graves. In 2002, Lisa Marie reached out. They met at a coffee shop in Memphis, 2 women shaped by the same man's absence. They didn't become best friends. Their lives were too different, but they understood each other. They shared stories. They cried. They laughed about the strange inheritance of loving Elvis Presley. "He would have wanted you to have this," Lisa Marie said, sliding a small box across the table. Inside was a guitar pick, worn smooth, initials scratched in the back, EP. "He used this during the '68 comeback special," Lisa Marie said. "My mom saved it. She wanted you to have it." Sarah held the pick like it might vanish. "Why?" "Because you were his daughter too," Lisa Marie said simply. "And you deserved something more than a letter." Sarah still has that guitar pick. It sits in the wooden box next to the letter. Her children know the story now. Her grandchildren will know it too. The inheritance isn't money. It's not fame. It's not the mansion or the jumpsuits or the gold records. It's the knowledge that someone loved you from a distance. That someone kept promises in silence. That someone tried even when trying was terrifying. That's what Elvis gave Sarah Daniels. And that's what haunts Graceland still. The music room at Graceland looks the same as it did in 1977. Same piano. Same furniture. Same feeling of waiting, like Elvis might walk in any moment and start playing gospel hymns until 2 a.m. Tourists walk through every day. They take photos. They whisper. They feel something they can't quite name. But the people who worked with Elvis, the ones still alive, still carrying the stories, they know what that feeling is. It's the weight of promises kept in secret. It's the echo of love that couldn't speak its name. It's the ghost of a good man doing hard things. Charlie Hodge died in 2006. Before he passed, he told the story of that midnight kitchen confession to a documentary crew. He wanted her to know, Charlie said, his voice still breaking after almost 30 years. That's all he wanted. For her to know he tried. Priscilla, when asked about it in interviews, always spoke carefully but honestly. Elvis loved in ways he couldn't always show publicly. But he loved deeply. And Sarah was part of that love. The tabloids tried to make it scandalous. Elvis's secret daughter. Hidden child revealed. But the scandal never stuck. Because the truth was too simple, too quiet, too human. A young man made a mistake. A young woman bore the consequence. A child grew up without a father. And that father, famous, flawed, terrified, did what he could from the shadows. He paid the bills. He wrote the letter. He made the promise. It's not a perfect story. Elvis could have done more. He could have claimed Sarah publicly, fought the lawyers, said the truth out loud. But fear stopped him. Pride stopped him. The machine around him stopped him. But he didn't do nothing. And maybe that's the moral. Maybe it's not about perfection. Maybe it's about trying, even when trying is messy and incomplete and terrifying. Elvis Presley died at 42, overworked and overmedicated and alone on a bathroom floor. But before he died, he stood in his kitchen and made sure someone knew about Sarah. He made sure the letter would reach her. He made sure the promise wouldn't die with him. That's the Elvis who matters. Not the hip-swiveling icon. Not the Vegas caricature. Not the tragic ending. The man who stood barefoot at 2:47 a.m. and said the quiet part out loud. The man who loved imperfectly but persistently. The man who kept promises in the dark. That's the Elvis that haunts Graceland. That's the Elvis worth remembering. So here's the question. What promises are you keeping in the dark? What loves go unspoken? What truths stay hidden? What good are you doing that no one sees? Elvis's story isn't about fame or music or tragedy. It's about the space between intention and action. It's about trying even when trying is imperfect. It's about making sure someone knows before it's too late. Sarah Daniels never got to know her father. But she knew he loved her. She knew he tried. And in the end, maybe that's enough. Not perfect, but enough. If the story moved you, share it. Not because Elvis needs more fame, he has plenty, but because someone in your life needs to hear that imperfect love still counts. That silent promises still matter. That trying, even in the shadows, is worth something. Elvis stood barefoot in his kitchen and told the truth. What truth are you waiting to tell?